and gentlemen, dear friends, dear colleagues, dear Asma Khalifa, we are very happy to have you here for this evening. By the way, some of you might have heard it because we made a little chat, and Asma is in Sweden now. And I said she lost the Swedish prime minister after a few hours. So, I mean, difficulties everywhere. No, we go to Libya. I mean, I'm really so grateful that Asma Khalifa will talk to us this evening, talk with us also and answer questions. She's a real famous and important Libyan women's rights and peace activist. And she does not only work on Libyan women, but also she also worked on different countries like Yemen and Syria. She won a very important award, the Luxembourg Peace Prize in 2016, and was named as one of the 100 most influential young Africans of 2017. She's now a research fellow, a doctoral researcher at the GIGA Institute for Middle East Studies. GIGA is a German Institute for Global and Area Studies in Hamburg, if you don't know. Huh? And at the GIGA Doctoral Programme. And Asma is an expert to whom even the UN Security Council listens. No? At a meeting in September, she briefed the United Nations Security Council on the situation in Libya, on the current situation. She was invited by the Irish delegation that held the presidency at that time. I think now it's again changed, of course, yeah, because it was in September. And she was one of two Libyan specialists who were invited to brief the Security Council. And she addressed a lot of issues, the infrastructure problems in the country, and also, of course, what we will address also today, the lack of inclusion of diverse ethnic populations in the constitutional process, and systematic violence against human rights defenders and against women. And of course, women is one of our main issues also this evening. But we have to mention that we picked a particularly critical moment for Libya, ahead of elections, which should take place on December 24th. And I don't know if you, my dear audience, followed it, but only yesterday, the UN Special Envoy for Libya, Jan Kubiš, quit his job. I mean, 1 month before the elections, and the Special Envoy of the UN quits. So we just don't know what it means, and perhaps Asma Khalifa will be able to tell us. It's really, I mean, these elections, sometimes I wonder what's more dangerous for Libya, doing these elections or not doing these elections. I mean, we have very controversial candidates. One of them, as you well know, is Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi. And each of them almost is absolutely rejected by a part of the Libyan population. So very difficult. And we have the question of legislative election, the question of the system. I already mentioned the constitution, and of course, the big question of foreign fighters and mercenaries. But I don't want to talk too long. I want to give the board to Asma Khalifa, and thank you again for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for this really generous introduction. I hope I can do it justice. I will take you a little bit on a journey of what Libyan women have experienced over the past decade, starting perhaps from the point of departure that we have a very complicated legacy from Gaddafi's time. Gaddafi in the 80s and the 70s attempted to have a more feministic approach to women's liberation by, of course, including them in the military. So he created the security forces and the army, special female training academies. And he also established something called the revolutionary nuns that belong in the committees. These nuns, or politically active women, were also not allowed to marry without permission from Gaddafi, and were so outspoken and given so much space that they projected an extremely negative image of what a politically active woman is. And so by the end of the 90s, early 2000s, the image of a woman in politics, or a strong woman, or a woman, is that of a masculinized political puppet, or a woman that has no morals, or a woman that does not respect family structure. So having that in mind, we've come to a 2011. By then, or a lot of families have already tried to shelter women and young girls from political active life, because they considered it as completely alienating space that only the thugs of Gaddafi really were allowed to have. So in 2011, it was extremely I would say surprising, even for women, that the spark for the protests happened by women. It was women outside the courthouses in Benghazi on February 15th, protesting the arrest of a human rights lawyer who was defending the victims of Abu Slim prison massacre. The Abu Slim massacre is, happened in 1996, where more than 1,000 inmates have been killed because they were protesting living conditions, and families were not told of the fate of their children for many years later, that they've learned that they were dead. So they were visiting prisons and taking food and clothes to their dead relatives for years before they realized that happened. And until now, there is no justice on whether they were buried in a mass grave or whatever has happened to them is still unclear. So these women went out to protest, and that's in parallel, I think, police violence occurred and sparked the protests that happened that we knew in 2011, which unfortunately led to an intervention. But still, it was quick that women organized in the background with the opposition to form the 17th February coalition. They were leading the humanitarian action. They were even smuggling, including weapons, to rebel forces. They were holding up the front, and the opposition, I would say, at that time used the image of women being active in the revolutions, whether it's in protest or other forms, as a means to say that, oh, look at us, we want democracy, we're so progressive that we have women amongst our ranks. And unfortunately, Libyan women will have to learn later, well, not so very later, but later, that with an image, our bodies were used for this narrative of advancing an agenda against Gaddafi, and rape was used as well as an agenda that was against Gaddafi. It completely damaged, I think, the actual victims and survivors of rape who could not get justice or could not get any help because the topic was so politicized and was misused. So in the liberation speech, the infamous liberation speech of Abdel Jalil, who is the head of the opposition at the time, he came out to support young men who were fighting, with promising them salaries, promising them incentives, and to lift the restrictions on polygamy that we had in the Libyan legal system. He claimed women were, of course, important as mothers, sisters, and daughters, and so forth, setting the tone for us to indicate that the struggle is only beginning for women in Libya. And so in the years after, there's been tremendous work. For the first time in many years, civil society organizations were allowed to exist and register, majority of those led by women and young women. But then it was already in 2013, the leadership at the time was fighting the CEDAW, for instance, agreement. There's been protests going against it, still is today, actually a few weeks ago. There's been the demonizing of female member parliamentarian or the General National Congress. And so the space continued to shrink until 2014, where electoral violence unfortunately led to another civil war. In that month of the elections, a human rights activist, Selwa Bugigis, was assassinated. Her husband was assaulted. A parliamentarian was bombed in Derna. Her car was bombed, and so she was also killed. And in the subsequent months, until 2016, assassination of female human rights activists, journalists, and civil society actors continued to happen in a scary base that have driven most civil society activists' work, especially on human rights, on gender, on politics underground, or to Tunisia, where of course also the UN political dialogue was happening. So it was, and on those years we met with the very much conservative legal reform attempts by the GNC, which is illegitimate, but still attempted to and succeeded in reducing, for instance, the age marriage of young women from 21 to 18. And giving judges special licenses to marry young women even under 18. They have tried to go back to a really archaic, very old Islamic conservative tradition of having the house of obedience, which is a form of punishment a husband can deliver to take his wife if she's not listening to him, in a sort of isolation state. Until she does so. They've also tried in this legal text, which was overturned thankfully by the Constitutional Court, but they were trying to also give women wifely duties already stipulated as an article. And so we were advocating for women's inclusion in the Tunisia in the political dialogue, which at first had zero women, even though the UN was responsible completely as a mediator to bring actors, but first they've only invited men. So we felt that while we're not being represented in a peace process that was supposed to bring a solution to the conflict that we have, we were also losing what little rights we've also had inside Libya. And I think such a reflection is I think at the center of the problem of why women why women are not on the peace tables, because if they're not there, that means the system, the structure will not be inclusive of them in the future, even if said agreement was successful. So after so much advocacy from civil society, two women were included, each on both sides of the conflicted parties, but women were so active in the corridors as civil society actors. So I was told by numerous people that it was actually the recommendations of women in civil society actors that made so much the Libyan political agreement agreeable, because it had answered the unemployment issues, it had answered the issues of inclusion, it had answered the DR, so solutions to security sector reform. And of course, that challenges the stereotypical, even including from the UN image of what including women means, because of course they tokenize women and include us to speak about women's issues. Well, yes, security is my issue, water is my issue, displacement is my issue, security sector is my issue, and that's is still, I'm afraid, is that it's still an invisible thread, I think, when thinking about the inclusion of women. The situation, I'm afraid, went from worse to worse because the agreement was never adopted by the House of Representatives in the East. We went through then several other conflicts that displaced hundreds of thousands of Libyans, including the last but not least attack on Tripoli in 2019 to 2020. Which continued to happen even in the middle of a pandemic. Hospitals were being bombed. And so it's the situation for women, as I can only give a little bit of a brief description of the problems. We do not have law enforcers that belong to the government. We do not have laws on gender-based violence. We do not have shelters. We do not have support for rape survivors of any kind. And we do not have hotlines, governmental hotlines or policies to address domestic violence, which is a huge and a terrible phenomenon that was there before 2011, but has gotten worse because, of course, that's what war does as well. It increases the domestic violence issues tenfold. And in 2020, I would say that after the lockdown has happened or went into effect in Libya, in the same week, 4 women were killed by their partners, their spouses, because they were locked down with each other in the house. It's terrible, but still there is women make up the majority of the education system, higher especially education system. They make up a lot of the workforce as well, without having legislations that support them, but they still make up quite a majority of the workforce, but they're not represented in politics, as maybe the audience have heard. There's the kidnapping, extortion, and the threats against women in politics is still quite in effect. There's been the parliamentarian who disappeared because she was outspoken against the war on Tripoli. And just last December, a human rights lawyer also was killed in the middle of the street in front of people because she was speaking about corruption. So and the turnout now for the presidential elections, out of 98 candidates, only 2 of them are women, and we were so worried in the beginning that none will come out to the candidacy, because it is a dangerous field to be in Libya, unless you are backed by a militia or an armed group, or belong to a very influential family that can offer protection. But even tribes no longer offer that sort of protection to women. So the challenge remains quite heavily is the protection issue. There is no one to turn to if a woman is in danger, whether it's her partner or a political rival. There is a very weak legal infrastructure that cannot be fixed unless we have elections and a legislative body that is recognized and elected by the Libyan population. And we have a legacy, a conservative patriarchal cultural norms, and a legacy of Gaddafi's failed attempts of feministing a system that will need, I think, also decades of awareness, of discussion, of dialogue in a space that no longer exists. Civil society is struggling even more today. It's not able to receive funding because of how banking system is working in counterterrorism policies. We have also new legislation and regulations that limits their work. I have heard that several civil society organizations, including ours, is possibly not able to get an extension on their registration because we refuse to disclose the names and the names of our beneficiaries, but refuse to disclose the names of victims that we work with or survivors that we work with. So with that space not being able to work in, or if you work on a small group of people, because it's not possible to in Libya's diverse political armed groups, it's not possible to work in every location sometimes, depending on what you are working on. And so doing projects in Libya, I say it's always a very interesting draw of strategic map, where you're saying, oh, I can do this workshop here, but I can't do it in the neighborhood, in that neighborhood of the same city, because it's that sensitive and it's that restrictive. And if that space doesn't exist, then what is really the future of working on issues of human rights and politics? That's very concerning for me, because it means that so long there is no dialogue and exposure and exchange, there is no challenging of patriarchal, old-fashioned and restrictive conservative norms. And if that does not happen, then we continue to have, even if we make advances politically speaking or legally speaking, we would still be held back by these norms. I'll leave the space for questions.
So thank you very much, Asma. I mean, this was really so interesting to listen to you, because I mean, of course, I did not hear some things for the first time, but really the historical context of women and Gaddafi and the consequences it had for women afterwards. It was not clear to me. I have really to admit. You mentioned your organization, your NGO. Would you like to tell us some things about it? What are you doing really?
Yeah, so Tamazight Women Movement was founded in 2015. And what we wanted to do is both research and do projects based on those research on gender-based violence, on the experiences of indigenous women, mainly speaking Amazigh women, but also of the Tepo and the Tuareg. And we wanted to address the issues that women, or the experiences of women, more from an intersectional perspective. Because whilst everyone suffer in war, there is also a multifaceting of suffering for people who have been erased, like the indigenous population during Gaddafi's reign, or because of policies, existing policies, live extremely remotely. In the south of Libya, for instance, women are stateless because they belong to Tebo, the Tuareg community, and so they do not access even the basic rights in education, health, etc. And so we wanted to bring that, because we thought we did not see it enough in existing projects or campaigns that we were all part of as founders. And so since then, we worked on political providing support for women who are in municipalities in the Fusa Mountain, to bring more how to bring forward gendered policies, how to address specific needs of women in their municipalities. We did quite a lot of advocacy on indigenous people's position in the conflict. We worked also on a 4-year project with 7 other Libyan organizations, bringing young people and women to work together on addressing the issues of security, human security. And we produced on that a report that you could find online called Libyans at Risk, which is very informative because it tells the stories of over 122 people across the country, of their daily lives, their daily struggles. So just access to electricity and power, being able to go to school, being able to have an education or employment opportunities. And we have been doing on almost annual basis, of course, annual campaigns against violence against women. Last year, we did a virtual gallery that's called Violence Outside the Battlefield, and we wanted to highlight, because in the war, the sounds of bombs and the big horrible violence is so visible that the violence against women becomes extremely invisible. And you see it even in the streets. Women, we had images of women being beaten because they were queuing in front of the banks by the security guards. We have images of women being kidnapped in the middle of the street in the middle of the day. And so we wanted to bring that, we wanted to bring domestic violence. We wanted to bring violence at schools. And so we had artists who sent us really beautiful pieces. It's still online for those who are interested. So it's, and I think now we are going to work on a research project that looks into the impact of how security projects impact individuals in Libya and communities.
Of course, I still have many questions, but there is one already arriving, which really fits to what we are talking about, the channels. The question exactly is, what channels do Libyan women organizations have to lobby in Libya today? I would say not only to lobby, but to work. I mean, you have partners there, or how does it function practically?
You mean lobbying on Libya?
Yes, I mean...
is that the question?
It's not, perhaps the person who sent the question can elaborate. It's have to lobby in Libya today. I mean, I thought it's just meant to work in Libya today. I mean, which channels? Because lobbying for, okay.
In Libya, yeah.
Lobby in Libya. Yeah,
well,
but for whom, yeah? Yeah. Okay, please.
I think now there is the GNU, the government that was selected after the UN process, and so through that there has been a lot of lobby advocacy, mainly with the Ministry of Women. There's a Ministry of Women. There's a Ministry of Social Affairs that also is concerned with women's issue. There's also the parliamentarians, female parliamentarians at the House of Representatives in the East. But to bring any agenda that is gender-based, or to bring any agenda for women's rights, has been super challenging. I remember my experience back in 2012 with an actual legitimate elected the GNC, and there was at least 2 female women. I mean, we were successful back then. We had 30% seats. Women in the GNC, and I remember we were coming with these policies up to the parliamentarians, and the parliamentarians said, we are threatened every single time we would mention something that is in relation to women. They're not only threatened, they are also faced with defamation. There's one incident that happened in a session that was broadcasted online, that the Speaker of the House insulted the women, the female parliamentarians, quite publicly. So, and in that same year, in 2012, 2013, incidents of even lawyers, so when trying to work on laws, etc., with the Ministry of Justice, the lawyers were threatened. They would kidnap their children by telling them where they are studying, in which school, or that they come to them in the evening and try to demand to take the husband for questioning. So it's difficult to lobby and advance a women's agenda when it could get you killed.
Thank you, and I have to apologize. I did not understand the question. You understood it much quicker than it was lobby.
No problem.
Thank you very much. I mean, there are other questions, but because you mentioned it yourself, and and you talked about it, I think also in the UN Security Council. I mean, how is the relationship between different groups of women in Libya? I mean, to make it also an inclusive thing to work for human rights, and not to have, I mean, for example, Arab organizations, Tamasiti organizations, are you all on the same talking eye to eye, or also?
We often work in coalition. In fact, I refuse to work on any project that does not integrate to some extent a collaboration between organizations, because directed funding and donor policies have already created a competitive, and I would say that's where the division lays, is not really with the identities, but mostly with how organizations are receiving funding, whether they are able to receive funding. So it created an exclusive environment for organizations that speak English, that have capacities to do reporting, etc., to get funding, while younger, smaller organizations struggle to work. And I would say that's where the tension lays. The tension lays with donor agendas. But there is quite a lot of collaboration, I would say, until the 2019 happened. And there the division happened between the East and the West. So it's still on the mend. But when it comes to women, it's of course never a homogenic group. It's a massive group of interests and diverse, interesting groups and political agendas. But I would think that it lacks to become a movement, because of the various problems that I've outlined before, including a lack of space to meet together in order for us to have a sort of conversation of what it means to have a women's agenda for Libya.
And did this relationship between different women groups, also ethnic groups, change after 2011? I mean, was it during the Gaddafi rule, was it just covered with by an authoritarian regime, or?
He denied that we existed. So, of course, we could not speak our language, we could not practice our traditions and cultures. And the reason why I have an Arabic name is there is a law that prohibits the use of any non-Arab names. And so, of course, 2011 came, and it opened up the space for the indigenous groups to practice their identities publicly. We've been teaching Tamazight in schools now for the past 10 years. Young children all know how to read and write, whilst the several generations before me doesn't, including my generation, unless you attempted to learn yourself, it's not possible. So it's I would say there's still much more problems, and the threat against indigenous group is still very very real. In 2019, when Haftar attacked with his Libyan armed forces Tripoli, they have committed crimes that could arise to ethnic cleansing against the Tabu in the east, in the south. So they've bombed communities. There's been parliamentarians from the east who came out and said that we need to exterminate those Ahmadiyya who are fighting our army, and so on and so forth. And there's also the religious authorities in the east came out, because the Ahmadiyya are also practicing Abadis, which is a minority Islamic sect. And so there's been also fatwas or religious texts that said that Abadis are infidels, so they're not Muslims. And you're not allowed to pray with them. You're not allowed to socially interact with them. And those are continuous dangerous attacks that in a context of war and conflict are very very much existential threats.
I'm checking the questions, and I find two which are very similar. I mean, one is what's the typical for, sorry, now I've lost it. Yeah, how does the image of women in Libya compare to other Middle Eastern countries? And there is another question, which is, why is this threatening and defamation against women a Libyan particularity? Is it, I mean, the question is it so much better in Tunis or even Egypt for women? What's so Libyan about the situation?
I think the first one, you said, sorry, if you could repeat that again.
Of course. How does the image of women in Libya compare to other Middle Eastern countries? The image. And I would
say there is, well, of course, it's, I wouldn't say there is a huge difference, but um, there have been living in obscurity. In fact, all Libyans have been living in obscurity because Gaddafi is the superstar, and he did not allow for any other image to exist except himself as the supreme leader and the king of kings and so on and so forth. So what is particular about Libya, perhaps in that way, is that there's not so much to be known about Libyan women, and not so much to be known about other groups, because it's not been allowed to come out in the in the totalitarian society that we lived in. But I wouldn't say it's very different. I would say it's just not as existing as clearly as other women in the region. As for wider defamation and threats, they're not a Libyan particularity. I'm sure any woman who comes out in public in any, I can assure you that comments about her looks and what she does and her family value and the men in her family are going to be all a casual occurrence. What is different in Libya is that we don't have police. I mean, I know it's hard to imagine, but we actually don't have an active police because there's so many armed groups, and we have over 1,000 armed groups that operate with complete impunity. I'm talking about courts not being able to function or carry out ruling, lawyers not being able to do their work, because who would go against someone who has a Kalashnikov? Or even more, an anti-aircraft, a tank even. So it's this impunity that we've been living in the past 10 years. I mean, they have been kidnapping also prime ministers and ministers and judges, and there is nothing to be done about it because simply there is no one that could fight them or go against them, and that would be a conflict. So the state is in constant living either by bribing them, continuing to work either by bribing armed groups or living under the threat of armed groups.
Well, I also would say this is a big difference to Egypt and also to Tunisia. I mean, we have really a years long war in Libya. I mean, as you said, I think this was very impressive what you said. In the environment of violence, of war, also the violence against women, it's invisible, it disappears, no? Even more so. Yes, there is a question from before also, which I find interesting. Yeah, because also regarding your organization and so on. I mean, what can Libyan women living abroad contribute and support? And I add to this question, what can, I mean, we contribute and how can we support? What would you expect? And also perhaps a little bit more on the UN role, huh? Because it's a little bit ambiguous, because we heard they heard you, no? And you spoke also about other things than women.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's good to speak about women also, we do it here. But I mean, you were slightly critical also, no?
I am very critical of them. In fact, I could talk for hours about the role of the UN, but I'll answer first about women abroad and how they can contribute to support. I think Libyan women in diaspora could play a vital role, especially when there is so much lack of space and there is so much danger at speaking out and being a dissident in an environment that is violent, to bring out the voices of issues that are not being able to address. So it's basically us being a conduit for women in Libya, for the things that they want us to address but are not able to, and that is where our role and support could be most vital. But also with the now lack of being able to receive funding or not being able to apply because of the restrictions, that is also where something women in the diaspora could contribute. In effect, our role should always be in support and solidarity, but not taking the lead for issues inside Libya, because that is something women who experience it in Libya should be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, of course, not only Libyan women, but you are talking about, I mean, support from outside.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the UN? We don't
Yeah,
get
so
it also.
well, I would say that I've described it before as a failure of international mediation when it comes to Libya. And for many, many reasons, because it's been now 10 years of having UNSMIL, which is the United Nations Special Mission in Libya, but not for first culturally appropriating Libyan women, as in saying, well, because Libyan society is conservative, we couldn't just like outright invite Libyan women to a certain processes, which is quite offensive, actually. Second of all, to constantly speak down in a way that the Libyans are never accounted for as actual partners in the process, but as recipients of projects or as implementers of projects, which is a complete failure, because if the agenda of women's rights or human rights is not actually carried out by Libyans, is not planned and carried out by Libyans, there's very little chance that it will have tremendous success, because it will be seen as always as an outside project coming in on our process. There's been also quite a lot of criticism about how they are swayed by spoilers of the peace processes. So people who are conflict actors or warlords or governments who are pressuring for one way to go or the other. And that's what made the previous process fail in 2015, 2016. And this is what's making it now also looking like a failure, because they've enabled with corruption. I mean, it's also an old process, to bring the troublemakers on a table to bring peace. How is that expected to be actually working logically? You have two sides, let's say, if there are two sides, who literally tearing the country apart. You bring them to ask them what would be a solution. If you think about it, you would think that's insane, but this is exactly what the UN is. The UN process is to bring on conflicted actors to bring out a peace process, but which of course comes out to be as not peace process, but which institution, who leads what institution, and who becomes a prime minister, and who becomes whatever commander. And what happens to the Libyan people, what happens to the solution of actual war, what happens to the rebuilding, to the reform. They don't think about that, because that's not why they've caused war. They benefit from conflict.
But what would have been the alternative then to, I mean, I get your point, you cannot only put those actors together and say, okay, negotiate your new Libya, how it should look like. No, this is a little bit what happened. But I mean, ignoring these people.
No,
is
it's
also
not
a
about ignoring them. It's about having a bigger table. It's about mediating with them to come to agree on a ceasefire, to agree on a certain process, but also having a process where you actually have solutions outlined and they are committed to it. We also have a problem. It's not just the UN. I mean, the UN is a member states. And when it comes to Libya, we have a divided Europe. We have a very unclear, ambiguous European policy. We have Germans and French fighting over things, or Italians and French fighting over things. And that harmed, of course, the Libyan process, because certain European countries or regional countries were directly involved in the war. I mean, the civil war in Libya is not very civil war. It's also internationalized, because you had Turkey, you had UAE, you had France, and you had several other states being active in bombing or in providing support for armed groups. And that means that they did not really support, a certain solution in the UN process. So that when we say that this person is violating this agreement, why can't you, put them a bit accountable, apply a bit pressure, so they respect in the future the agreements that they sign? Nothing happens, because it goes against one nation's interest, or it's and that's extremely problematic. So it does make us think about how international processes should be rethinked in the future, and what the UN should look like in the future.
During your presentation, you also mentioned, I think, I think you said, I don't remember the word you used, but the unfortunate intervention in Libya. I mean, what would have happened? So could you explain what you mean by?
I mean that it's a conflicting consequence, right, of intervention that is violent, where you basically remove a system completely. So you protect civilians from imminent danger by uprooting a huge power dynamic. I mean, the only power really, and everything else collapses, and then you leave it. You leave it to fend for itself, even though you've trained, you've supported armed groups, and you've seen them over the months growing in the thousands. I mean, I think some official records in 2011 said it was 8,000 armed men who fought against Gaddafi with the help of NATO. By 4 months after the liberation of Libya, it was 30,000. Now we have hundreds of thousands of armed men. And that tells you something, right? I also mentioned that the head of the opposition promised incentives that made young men want to join armed groups because they're getting salaries and cars, and so it's and the international community watched all of this. They've seen all of this and did nothing.
I mean, but the whole how can I say, the whole, not excuse, but really the topic at that time was the responsibility to protect, and everybody listened to Gaddafi saying he will kill those rats or something. So
no, I'm not against that. I was there. I was terrified. I was in Tripoli watching, like many people on the TV. But I'm saying that the right to protect should also come with the right to rebuild, because it's not with the right to rebuild, with the right to help to rebuild, because it wasn't possible for us to do that with that sort of power vacuum happening.
So it was a mistake to leave practically, and then to say, okay, we did your job, and now you take over and do whatever you want with this country.
Yeah.
I see. So I look a bit, I don't want to okay, the question, if you can, with your political and visible personality, with Libyan background, if you are going to Libya and feeling safe, and I mean, if you can go to Libya, and how you, please.
I am able to go to Libya. I go there every year, sometimes twice, to either do work or see my family, because my family is still out there. It's not always safe. I've been threatened before by being arrested at the airport, and so I traveled by land borders from the Tunisia, because different airports and borders are controlled by different armed groups. It's not possible to always do the work. I have been interrupted at meetings and sessions where we were held hostages, and our phones or computers were searched or cameras destroyed. I had work that was cancelled because we received threats that it will be raided. So it's not exactly safe, but it is my context, and so I understand where I could do work or where I couldn't, or when I should lay low. It's this year it wasn't possible for me to go after I spoke at the Security Council, because I needed to give it time that people forget about it. But hopefully next year I'll be going.
Another question mentions the African Union, but it's not a real question, but a statement. The African Union is also a partner trying to get Libyan factions around the table too. So what's the role of the African Union?
I think they could have had a very important role in mediation in 2011. I mean, unless the intention was, of course, not to allow Gaddafi to live, because there has been a mediation attempts before the resolution came out. But the African Union was swayed so easily by Gaddafi, because that's the problem, right? Gaddafi founded the African Union. He funded the African Union. And so he was pandered to. He wasn't really spoken to as an equal partner, because he was, giving money right and left to African state. It hasn't actually played a strong role in mediation over the past years. It's been invited by the European Union or invited by the UN processes, but it hasn't done in itself, and that's a bit disappointing, I would say.
And because you mentioned the Europeans, the EU and the European countries, like the most important, I mean, the infighting really between Italy and France, I think. Is your impression that this situation improved we saw 3 Libya conferences, 2 in Berlin and 1 in Paris only a short time ago, I think 2 weeks ago, not even. And so the impression was, I mean, at least they tried to bring everybody together and get one position. I mean, of course, the position is always foreign powers should get out of Libya, and everybody means perhaps somebody else, no? But how do you see these Libya conferences?
Well, a lot of boasting, I would say, a lot of politicking around, I think, already established issues, but there is no will for actual solutions. There has been sometimes really good points as it produced in the meetings, but there is no enforcement, because each or different actors wants different actors in Libya, I mean, international actors or regional actors, different actors in Libya to come out in power. Even now in the elections,
even
now, yes, yeah. we've been saying for months, we need a constitutional basis, we need a legal basis, so that the elections are not contested, the results will be respected, so that we have actually a clear sequence of elections. But it's been really ignored, because they wanted this loose legal flawed system that would allow for war criminals, that would allow for corrupt politicians to run again for elections, even though they shouldn't be. So,
but is it already decided if those people you are talking about, I mean, can run? I mean, of course.
They are, I mean, no, well, the High Commission for Election has to approve, but they've received their candidates. They've received Aguila Saleh, Haftar, even safer, Gaddafi now is back. They've received Bashara, they've received a number of problematic names.
Yeah, also Haftar is there, no?
Yeah.
One of them.
Yeah.
And also the present prime minister.
Yeah, several prime ministers or head of government. Yeah.
And I mean, really, I mean, the question of the constitutional basis, for which kind of system does these president candidates run? How will the system, the state look? Is it a strong president, a strong parliament? I mean,
it's not clear. We don't have a constitution as of now approved. We've had a constitutional process that was started extremely problematically in 2015 with electing 60 members who did not have to be lawyers, who did not have to have legal expertise to write a constitution in the middle of a civil war, which meant that they were not able to meet with everyone, or did not able to travel across the country. Not to mention that the majority, I think more than 30 people have dropped out, so they don't have the majority of vote to come up with a constitutional draft. The Amazigh and then later the Tuareg and the Tabu boycotted and also left the process. The Amazigh boycotted from the beginning, but the Tabu and the Tuareg later on, because the Arab majority kept just voting on issues themselves. And so they produced this really legally loose text that is very much full of loopholes and open to misinterpretation, and anyone who comes into power can become a dictator, basically. And now we don't have that. We don't have a separation of power. It's not clear. It's clear now that it seems we're going to have parliamentarian elections. We'll have, results for parliamentarian elections before presidential elections, but we didn't have that discussion. Why should we have a presidential elections? It came out, I think, as a need to have both elections for a consecutive and legislative bodies, so to avoid the problems of having a legislative body that continued to sabotage the processes. But that's not something that is clear. That's not something that's clear in legal texts. And what Agela has tried to do, so from House of Representatives, is pass bylaws that don't have basis, that also are contradictory. Both laws, executive election and presidential election and legislative elections, have contradicting articles that have already been violated by some of them that are now electing themselves, including now the Prime Minister, who has pledged to not run for elections after he has run out of his term. That you have an inclusion problem with the parliamentarian elections, because it's based on the law that was in there in 2012. So what Agela did is base himself legally on laws that existed in 2012, as if you did not have 7-8 years of civil war.
No, it sounds so chaotic, but
yes,
you think
it is extremely chaotic.
Yeah, but so you think that presidential and legislative elections will take place on the 24th of December?
As if now it seems, yes. Yeah. But of course you don't know. We have when Saif announced that he was running, you had, I think now 5 electoral centers have been closed down in the west of Libya. And you have in the east of Libya a very it's not clear really the sort of security that's going to protect ballots, and in saying that the Libyan armed forces has the biggest role. I would say there is a danger that there will be electoral fraud, or at least electoral theft. There's been also concerned citizens who'd say that they would text the High Commission for Elections to see where they are registered when they haven't registered before and found themselves already have registered. So there's multiple problems facing the elections.
Which brings me back to what I mentioned in my introduction. Is it more dangerous to do elections, to hold elections, or not? Because also one danger will be the low turnout, which then really lack of legitimacy. Whoever wins, who has a big part of the population against himself.
It's it's a danger also not to have the elections, because we couldn't possibly continue with the status quo as it is. The status quo means East and West division, more conflict and war. I think again we're put a choice like in 2011 between war or a dictatorship, and we're not given a third option. When there is a third option, we've had a year. If it wasn't not enough, there should have been stipulation for extension to prepare. If we had been better prepared, had a constitutional basis, also had a better security plan for protection of ballots and electoral centers, we would have had good elections. If we had a good vetting system where we did not allow for warlords and war criminals and corrupt politicians to run, it would have been better. But that needed a strong political will, and that needed a strong leadership from the international mediators that did not exist.
Well, we don't want to keep you too long with us, because I know also online events are much more tiring than if we sit comfortably in a room together. But I want to take up other questions, if you allow. One is, I think, very important because we did not mention it, and it plays a huge role in the European discourse about Libya. No? I mean, I am always really upset. I say, if we, the Europeans, look at Libya, they see only refugees and not Libya. No? And one of the questions is regarding the EU and EU countries, how much do you think their policies vis-a-vis Libya are influenced by their restrictive measures on refugee crossing the Mediterranean from Libya?
Very, I would say,
yeah, it's
especially for Italy,
yeah.
their main concern was, of course, migration and refugees. And they had all these agreements, of course, with the government in the west of Libya. So they supported the government in the west of Libya against the government in the east, because they were helping them not allow boats to cross over to European borders. And it's quite shameful, actually, the way I think Italy and other states have handled it. But I think because Italy was pressured by other European states not to allow refugees and migrants to come to their shores. But they have they've had dealings with armed groups. They've had dealings with smugglers. And knowing fully well that these refugees and migrants will return to be human trafficked, sold to other human traffickers, to be treated abominably in detention centers that do not have even the basic humane conditions. Women, female refugee migrants are raped. There's now yesterday a report came out from the FIDH. I encourage everyone to go on there and read it. That outlines the crimes that are committed against refugees and migrants and allowed by the EU through Operation Irene and other agreements.
Yeah. The work of your organization or other organizations you cooperate with also extends to the migrants, and
there's been more and more inclusion of them. Yes, either when thinking about or bringing or raising awareness or bringing advocacy on the issue, or even in I think in a lot of economic empowerment actually projects, they include female migrants as participants.
No, it's really a tragedy, and I think also, I mean, what you are saying, that the cooperation of these groups, militant militias and criminals. I mean, militias is perhaps even not the right.
Yeah,
context.
some of them are armed criminal groups. Yeah,
armed criminal groups, and made some observers then also think of supporting the strongman in the east, hoping that he would I mean, create order and fight everybody, and it was a huge misunderstanding, wasn't it?
I think they thought he had the capacity to win, and that shows also they had a lack of understanding about the armed groups' dynamics in the west of Libya, because they would know there is no way that he would be accepted in the west of Libya, not even if a lot of bloodshed, and a lot of bloodshed has happened. I mean, it was a terrible military campaign, but they also did not expect that Turkey would go to that extent to protect its interests in Libya. And speaking of that, today is a very interesting day for people in the Middle East, because Turkey has invited and has received the UAE to have partnerships and dealings, which the UAE has been prominently fighting the Muslim Brotherhood in the region, including in Libya. That's why they backed Haftar in Libya against the government in the West, perceiving them as Muslim Brotherhood, which of course some of them are. And now with Turkey and UAE partnering, and UAE saying that they will also have talks with Iran, it's going to be very different political dynamic.
Well, perhaps I should explain. I mean, I don't know if everybody knows what you are referring to. The Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed, was in Istanbul, in Ankara today, And I mean, this is really a visit. If you would have told me half a year ago, if it ever would happen, I would have said no. I mean, this is really an incredible development. And as you said, not only in Libya, but also in Libya, they were on the very, very opposite sides. So do you think this will change something? I mean, do you think it also it can influence this question?
Absolutely.
Of
it weakens the positions of those who rely completely on the backing of the United Arab Emirates or Turkey.
Mm-hmm. But
because there's more at stake if they're collaborating and investing with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But again, maybe not.
Hopefully, I mean, it's really hard to imagine, hard to believe. I mean, but okay, at least one point to be optimistic. Okay, no, this is from Gertraud, who is telling us. I thought first it's Nadia El Baghdadi from CEU, but she says. Striking from the Margins project includes the cross-border projects between Tunisian and Libyan women. We think you could link, we could link you both. I mean, this is an offer by our Secretary General of the Kreisky Forum, and we.
Thank you, Gertrude.
Yes. So, okay. For concluding, I think I have one question. There is one I have to say, which is asking how you are driving your course from there, where you are. But I mean, we talked, I think, what we can do from outside. I'm sorry if you did not hear Asma mention that, but I want to conclude with the question, which is, of course, also very, I mean, goes into the middle of the problem. Which forms of peace building strategies can you imagine for Libya? Really first steps look, and how, what do you think would it need for that? I think this would be a question which really would be perhaps also could give us some positive ending to this complicated issue.
Yeah, I think several processes have to happen at the same time. So we need to have a constitutional that is accepted and is inclusive of all Libyans, that builds a foundation of a strong government that is decentralized. Decentralization and redistribution of wealth are massive main demands by Libyans. We need to have a reconciliation process that is centered on accountability, transitional justice, and that centers victims. We need to also think and have a comprehensive security reform, thinking about not only joining the forces, because some of these, as Gertrude has mentioned, are criminal armed groups. So there needs to be a strong vetting. There needs to be incentive to drop down the weapons. And that only can be seen in hindsight if there is a stable government, if there is a strong constitution, if there is work opportunity. So also economic reform is also very important. That needs to happen right away. We need to stop being oil-centered economy. We need to have less corruption. We need to fight corruption in the economy, but also to think of how to build it more future. We need to fix the infrastructure, so return the displaced to their homes, fix their homes. So there's a lot of things that need to happen, and they all need a very wise and strong and hopefully competent governments that could do it, along with a strong, vibrant civil society that can hold them accountable when they're not doing the proper work, and that could facilitate a lot of some of these processes, especially the reconciliation. And for that, we also need a strong and independent and able to function judiciary in Libya.
Well, I mean, this is really a very long wish list, dear Asma.
It's several processes. I did say that.
Of course. And I mean, I wish you and all Libyans and your country so much that at least I mean, these elections not only go well, but open a way, I mean, for just breaking this strange situation Libya is in. I understand now very well what you said. I mean, it's to really surpass, to come over this division in 2 or 3 parts. Yes, perhaps you need elections. And we hope very much that everything goes well. I hope very much your election commission just cancels some names from the candidates list. We will see. It will be very, I mean, let's see. Let's say I would be interesting how these people would really perform, but it's better not to know. It's so much better if they would not be allowed to run. But we will see. I mean, I thank you so much for this evening. It was very, very informative. We all learned a lot, and we are extremely grateful you joined us. And I am absolutely sure it will not be the last time. I mean, if you want to come, I mean, and also physically come to Vienna, hopefully.
Oh, that would be wonderful. I've never been.
Now you have to. I mean, this is guaranteed.
Yeah.
And one day also this stupid Corona will end, hopefully. And I thank you all who were listening, and I hope to see you. I think it was my last event in this year, but I'm sure we see each other in the next year. And thank you again, Asma.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope it was clear and useful and not so much complicated. It might be very still challenging for Libya, but I think every time I hear of young people's work and what they're doing, despite the extreme difficult circumstances, I do maintain a little bit of hope that it might take a long time, but we will manage to get there one day.
You will. Thank you. Thank you. And bye-bye. Bye-bye.